real treat to have Keith in New Zealand. He no longer lives in New Zealand. He came over, I think, for a visit and unfortunately got stuck here because of the coronavirus. I'd say he's in a pretty good place to be stuck, though. So we're really fortunate to have him over here. Keith has been a systems leader for a long time. A leader of teams, a leader of programs, and a leader of people. He has the ability to make tough calls, say yes or no, not maybe. And he has a passion for the game and cares deeply about the people that he leads. Keith is going to do things slightly different. I mean, he wants to make sure that this isn't some sort of an engaging session. So I believe he wants to kind of change the rooms a little bit. So Keith, up to you, man. What would you like?
Let's get the formalities over with. I feel quite honoured when Leonard said come along and speak to people. I immigrated to the UK in 2003 as Chief Executive of England Basketball. I was told they were in a little bit of trouble organisationally. It was an understatement. And in the 17 years that I've lived over there, I don't think I ever got invited to go and speak to coaches. New coaching is absolutely still my passion. And I think you were very lucky today. You heard some outstanding people talk about leadership. And Kirk Penny, if you took notes of what he said today, it's pretty well all you need on leadership of basketball teams. Jack Sol, 2 years younger probably than Kirk, maybe more. His future's still ahead of him, and he has played in one of the greatest programs. Plus the fact that Jack Sol can say, I was actually starting 5 NCAA winners. Now I don't think, Leonard, any Kiwi or Australian can say that in the history of basketball. It's pretty fantastic. And 2 absolutely fantastic speakers there. Then you heard from Dan. Now, he is coached in what I consider to be the toughest league in the world. Do you ever get to watch the EuroLeague here? On Sky or anything like that? If you ever see a game, not just on TV, but live, it is the most brutal, competitive basketball there is. So when he tells you of the pressure he was under and how that sucked out his feelings and what to his family, that's very, very real. What is it about Kiwis that makes them good leaders? You think of Jack Sol, Kirk Penny, and when I look around the room here, I can see people, Darryl Cartwright, I was going to say Kurt Lammers, but he's not a Kiwi, Martin Favali, Kiwis. Where do we get these leaders from? Look at the coronavirus. Where are the leaders in the world? Are any of them the world's top leaders? Are any of them are men? And where do they get the skills to handle? Tell me, what does Jacinda Ardern have that most of the world's leaders don't seem to have?
Empathy.
She can relate. Now, most of what I'm saying gets back to coaching. It's that ability to relate to your team. What else does she have? Genuine, comes across as genuine. It's her. And you would have heard Dan say that. He said, I'm me. She's got a few other things too. Yep. Yep. So although Leonard has asked me to talk about bigger organisations, I really am a coach at heart. And it is that, when I look at Jacinda Ardern, she has these characteristics that coaches need to have. And nowadays, you know, you can go onto a thing called a computer and you can go into a thing called Google. And so if you want to know about leadership, you just put in leadership and you get 3 million references to leadership. It'll tell you all you need to know. It'll just be words. But she reflects leadership. She reflects the things you just said. Plus, I would add to that intelligence. So when she was talking, remember each day we used to tune in at 1 o'clock? It was like following a 5 or 10-day cricket test match and getting the score every day or something like that. And she would actually talk as if she knew what she was talking about. A degree of intelligence, knowing what a subject was, with humility, and one other word too I haven't used, pardon? Empathy. And when we look at the other world leaders, I was locked in a room in Wellington for 2 months because I live in North Wales now. I've retired. For my sins, I'm the chairman of Basketball Wales and still on the board of British Basketball Federation. And so I was watching a lot of Al Jazeera, which I don't think many people watch.
Yep.
When you were watching that, I was so short of something to sort of laugh at that all I had to turn on was some of the world leaders. Because they didn't have any of the characteristics that Jacinda Ardern showed. And those are the characteristics that a good coach needs when they're leading. So what happened to me, when we're talking about larger organisations, what do I know about leadership? Well, frankly, I'm still learning. Most people, don't think you ever stop learning anyway. But on the topic of leadership, I don't think you ever stop learning because the world is changing all the time. And if you're a basketball coach, and Benny asked a very good question from the past today, when you go out there and we watched that last half of that game before, and a lot of those fundamentals, there was no point posting up in that game because you will wave through to the basket for a layup if you wanted one, Benny. Even you could have managed that. But yeah, we learn all the time. And I remember, like when I was at school, suddenly being made captain of the first 15. And really, I wasn't a great player on the team. I was one of those people that Kirk Penny related to, did a lot of shouting, I think. Probably had the loudest voice. And then I remember in my early 20s, I was working because I've never been a professional coach. I was working in an office in Wellington. It was a stockbroker's office. And because the office manager left, I found myself in a management position. But you know what? I had something like 12 staff, and they were all female, and they were all good looking, and they were all older than me. And I knew absolutely nothing about leadership. So what do you think my leadership style was like? Do you think I went and looked up about it? No, I just shut up and just did my job, basically. Because I didn't know a thing about it at that stage. And it was only when I took up basketball coaching, I started to learn about teaching and leadership. And in those days, you couldn't go onto the internet, so you reverted to books. So this is why I've got you here. I'm going to now ask you some questions from the past. The very first book I ever got was a book by Glenn Wilkes. Any old-timers recognise that name? Nata, you've got a book by him now. I handed over all my collection of books to Basketball New Zealand, about 300 or 400 of them.
It's in my garage, yeah.
Oh. Well, I can look after that book, because I looked it up. And it's now, if you can still buy it, but it costs $890 US.
Well, you better pull it out of that garage.
Okay, you haven't heard of Glenn Wilkes. Have you ever heard of Red Holtzman? Good? Yeah, who's he?
He was coach of the Knicks 2 times they won.
He coached the Knicks in 1970. And it's around about the time I started coaching, actually. It was a bit before that. So I used Glenn Wilkes as a Bible. Now, everything that I ever learned about leadership and basketball was presented fundamentally in that book in a logical manner. If I hadn't read that, I would never have been successful at all. So you have to learn. If you want to be a leader or a manager, then you've got to do some process of learning. And Red Holtzman, I was lucky enough to be in New York, travelling over to London, and I saw the Knicks play. And of course, at the time, a whole lot of books came out. Guess who else was in that group? Phil Jackson, one of the players in that team. And if you read Phil Jackson's books on leadership, has anybody read any of Phil Jackson's books? Daryl? What comes across?
The one that stands out for me is Sacred Hoops. He relates to people a lot, and he looks to like other areas in terms of informing his practice with his coaching. It's not just X's and O's, and that's what made him good with people. His philosophies he had around managing people.
He had a nickname. Anybody remember what his nickname was? Phil Jackson, I think it was called the Zen Master. And if you read the book, it was all about mindfulness, and he used to give his players books to read when they had a break, all-star break or something like that. I remember one of them was given a book, something about the Zen of motorbike riding or some sort of thing. And they were supposed to go away and read that and then come back with a different mindset. But again, all those characteristics that we mentioned, knowledge, empathy, understanding, teamwork. I asked you before, why are New Zealanders quite good at this? And he wanted to answer, you're too modest. But why is it that Helen Clark's going to review the World Health Organization? Why is it that when you look at the top 100 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange, quite often they're led by New Zealanders? One of them tried out for the Tall Blacks way back in about 1980, a chap called Ross McEwen.
I'm sorry. I think the New Zealanders have that fighting spirit. That's why they, I don't say sporting arenas and say like All Blacks, the yachting, and that's why they beat everybody else in the world, because they have that competitive spirit. But on the other hand, they have that compassion. You don't have to be, a villain, but you have to be strong and have that strong will to go out there and compete and be heard and be felt.
I think you're right, and they have something else. They're quite good at team sports.
Very good.
Because they're prepared to do something that you as a leader have to get your teams to try and do. Sacrifice and work together. Now, how many people in this room, when I look around, the big boys, Brent, I'm sure, some of you others, when you were this high played rugby? No? Nobody? Well, most of us ran around in our bare feet when we were 8 or 9 or 10 years old playing rugby, if I remember rightly. And there's one thing that rugby teaches you, is that really nobody is bigger than the team. And even the basketball we've watched out here at times, there is the odd player you look at, they're thinking they're a bit bigger than the team. But when Kirk Penny was here talking about the teamwork at Virginia, the teamwork in the Tall Blacks, the culture, and he said there's no point saying things like there's no I in team. You have to really mean it. And I think Kiwis get that. And that's why when they head off overseas or whatever, they bring that to whatever organisation they're part of. And okay, I think, Leonard, you wanted me to sort of talk about bigger organisations and what happened to me and that sort of stuff. Well, what actually happened to me is I arrived in England, I was picked up at the airport, dumped in the office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after flying across the world, and left with a pile of fairly big shambles. And the office reflected it. Water stains on the floor because the roof leaked. They had £500,000, not dollars, for a small organisation, relatively small organisation. Staff all over the place. National leagues were in a shambles. Had 3 court cases going on, big ones, and really couldn't afford the salaries and things like that. And I thought, my qualification is as an accountant, so I could attack the financial side. So I called in an insolvency expert, and he said, we can fix this in a month if you're prepared to work hard. And he's the same insolvency expert that's still around now fixing up football clubs. Some other football club recently gone belly up, and he's involved in that. His name's Gerald Krasner. And I took that to the board, none of whom I'd met before the first board meeting, except the person who picked me up at the airport, dumped me in the office. And they said, no, you've got to work your way through this. So for 2.5 years, that's what I had to do, was just go to work every day and try and work through it. But you know, I think, as Benny said, it was the characteristics that I've grown up with in New Zealand and just getting stuck in, fix it up with a number 8 wire and that Kiwi attitude. But by doing that, by being in the office every day, and I could just add another little story, since I left in 2014, 6 years ago, they haven't had a CEO who's actually worked in the office 5 days a week. Most of them have travelled up from London or worked from home or whatever. And so the first thing was to do something that coaches have to do that we heard about today. You've got to be yourself, you've got to set an example, and what I really did was apply what I'd learned as a basketball coach. And that means you have team meetings, pull everybody in, and you get them all to speak. Why are the national leagues in a shambles? And by doing that, by empowering them, you found something else out. What do you find out if you actually ask the people who are working for you what's going on?
They know the solution.
And
They know the solution.
they usually know the solution, but you also find out who your leaders are.
Like stress and weaknesses.
Yeah, and nobody in the office knew who the leaders were. They basically were all working in little silos. And you know, a basketball team can't do that. You actually have to help out and work out. And so the easiest thing to do was to find out who the leaders were, get them into their role, which meant changing a few roles, and then let them do it. And that's called delegation. And it's a lot easier than I thought. Well, I thought it was a lot easier. And basically, from that time, that's February 2003 till the end of 2013, I had 80-90% of those staff work right through that whole period. 2 or 3 years later, after I left, most of them had gone. But you're building a team in exactly the same way you're building a basketball team. You're getting people to work together, to trust each other, and it sounds very easy. And to a large extent, I think it is. And you're learning all the time. And I carried on at that stage reading basketball books. And I'd like to go back to who, if you want to look up references of people that will help you with your coaching, then I mentioned a few names there, Glenn Wilkes, Red Holtzman, because the Knicks were a great team. But one of the greatest ones of all time there was a chap called John Wooden. And do you remember what Kirk said tonight when he was first speaking about the underpinning 5 things of Virginia? Can anybody tell me what some of those were? Have you got them written down?
I can't remember.
Service is one.
Pardon?
Service.
Yep.
Humility.
Yep. They were like 5 pillars, he said, weren't they? And you'll find that if you look at John Wooden's book and you look at the Pyramid of Success, you find that same framework there. Now, they're all just words. And Wooden actually applies descriptions of what each word means. And that's the foundation. He has a foundation level and then he builds on top of it. They're all words, but if you actually read them and apply them, they will help you in your coaching immeasurably. Very soon there'll be I understand there'll be a film coming out on another coach that I was lucky enough to visit in 1981. Very similar name to John Wooden. A guy called Morgan Wooten. Now, if you've ever read any of his stuff, it's exactly the same. It's very simple. And the film's going to be called The Godfather of Basketball. And he's probably the most impressive coach I've ever seen. You talk about leadership, he had it in spades. He coached at Tametha High School in Washington, D.C. for 40 odd years. In the middle of all that, I think he had something like a kidney transplant or something. And I remember being invited to his house for a meal, and it was on a Sunday, which is probably not a good day because I'm not the most religious person around, and he was. But exactly like the message from Kirkpenny, he had these religious principles, these basic things. But you know, he had more people at his practice, the high school practice, than you could believe. And if you went around and asked people what they were doing there, one guy was just making him cups of tea. He drank cups of tea out of a stein right throughout the practice. And I believe that each year he'd speak at run a coaches clinic at his school gym, and there'd be about 600 coaches there. And he, John Wooden, I believe, would Dean Smith, that's another great coach, a great leader, with all those characteristics of empathy and humility and knowledge. But I believe that John Wooden would stop the practice and say, "Morgan, would you mind going back and showing us how you did this again and that again?" Here were these legends picking this guy's brains. Now, I'm told that film's coming out fairly soon, so look out for it. The Godfather of Basketball. And I'm sure there'll be another layer of leadership on top of that. Anyway, get back to going to England. Where do you start with a national basketball governing body that was so dysfunctional? And the people who work for Basketball in New Zealand at the moment, you've got a very good chief executive, and if you look at the structure of Basketball in New Zealand, it is exactly what, when I went over there, I was aiming at. The thing we needed was steady increasing income. And if you're running a basketball federation, that income can come from several sources. But I would draw a square for the staff and put in one square the staff or the leadership. So if you can visualize a square, leadership up in one corner, then in the next corner would be your membership, because that's where you get your affiliation fees from, your members, your basic underpinning income. And then in the next corner I put down the National League, which in Britain was called the British Basketball League. We had no control over that at all, and to this day Basketball England and British Basketball doesn't have any control over that. And then in the next corner are your national teams. If you've got your national teams functioning well, then you can link up all the corners, and everything links, and it links back to that leadership, the head office, and all these things. So if membership's growing, then that's going to provide more funds into the national body. If your national teams are performing well, you start picking up contracts like television contracts. Same with your national league. And so you right in the middle of your square, you've got a dollar sign or a pound sign, what we have. Now somewhere in there, of course, you have the government handing out money for nothing. And how do the government assess how much they're going to give you? Well, we know that on the performance side, they'll look at your national teams. If they're doing all right, they'll give you more. They'll have a look at your membership, and if that's growing, they'll give you more for development and membership. The difference with your model in New Zealand now, of course, is you're picking up quite a lot of money from gambling, trusts, which is gambling, which is not a fact that we don't get any of that in Britain. Basketball England had a problem. Didn't control the National League, didn't have any national teams, none. 2003, none. Couldn't field even an under-20 team, or an under-16 team, or under-18. So we immediately had to get those teams back into Europe, and then within 2 years we had to try and get a British team at least so that we could get ready for the Olympic Games. So that, over a period of time, those were what I tried to aim for and what I got the staff to buy into that we were aiming for. One other thing that I noticed when I went over there, well, I had to move from the office. I told you that the office leaked. We actually owned the building, and to repair it or replace it was impossible. I found a very interesting family. It had a Pakistani father and a Yorkshire lady was the mother. And some of the boys looked like Pakistanis and some of the boys looked like white Yorkshire people. So they were quite a mixed family, but they all earned a reasonable income as accountants or whatever they did in life. And by sheer luck, I managed to have a few beers with one of them and they bought a building office, which I thought was great. It would pay a lot of the debts. And then I suddenly discovered that the lawyers controlled the title to the building, and the lawyers came out and said, we're owed £100,000. So the $150,000 I got from selling the property only turned out to be about 40 odd. So, but we moved to the English Institute of Sport in Sheffield, and I was then able to watch a lot of basketball because facilities are not good in the United Kingdom, or they weren't then, and we had 3 basketball courts. And so we could run tournaments and do things like that. And I discovered that the coaches were not like New Zealanders. They were generally not, and most of them were males, and they were generally not having played rugby, would be my simplistic. Can you imagine what coaches 20 years, well, maybe I should ask you another question. How many teams that represent England or the United Kingdom actually have English coaches? And how many have Australian coaches, Kiwi coaches, Italian coaches? I think the football team now has an Englishman coaching, Gareth Southgate. But it is phenomenal. For all the money they spend on coaching, for some reason the coaches don't have those qualities that allow them to relate to players on the fundamentals of leadership that we talked about: humility, understanding, empathy. And in fact, I've looked at how I would coach a British basketball team, because it's just something that the British men's team are just a little bit short of at the moment, which is a team culture. And I couldn't give you the answer of how you would get through to it. And I think the only person who could do that is probably one of their own, an ex-player, Kirk Penny or Daryl Cartwright. There was somebody from that environment that could help them. Because their coaches were all 17 years ago when I went over there, very militaristic. So you go down and watch an under-14 tournament and you would hear a barrage of criticism coming from the sidelines. Don't drop the ball. Don't lose your man. Don't do this, don't do that. And you know, there's something about coaching that if you use that word don't, it's something that happens. They do it.
Yeah, I was going to say they do.
Yeah. Because you've just put the suggestion into their minds. And that's another thing about leadership and coaching, is to be positive. So if you don't want somebody to dribble, encourage them to pass, encourage them to shoot. Take the focus away of what you don't want them to do, rather than say don't do this, because if you say don't do that, they'll probably do it. And so that's, again, that's another one of those building blocks. So that's pretty well. I haven't really got a lot else to say, but I was hoping you might have some questions or anything. Leonard?
Yeah, I got a question, but I mean, I don't want to hog all the questions if someone else has than me. No one. So your, I guess, transition from coaching to CEO, was that something that was part of a plan of yours? Was that like some sort of a transitioning plan, or was that something looking at it more?
No, the easy answer is it was part of my career. My actual career was chartered accountant. I became an office manager, accountant for a couple of companies on the way up. One stage I had my own business. Then I went school teaching, became head of the department of that school, and then had to make a choice whether I wanted to stay in education, be a headmaster. And instead I went back into the finance world, and then ended up at the Hillary Commission with the Sport Development Department. So pretty well it's just a career thing. And then 2002 there was a whole lot of restructuring going on, and from my knowledge of basketball, I thought I could help. And in the end, you know, everything that we needed to achieve, the debts were paid off, the legal cases were all sorted. In the end, we lost them all. Sorted money. The lawyers did very well. The lawyers did a great job of telling me, yep, we can win this, but then we didn't. We ended up with a pretty good British team at the Olympics that slightly underperformed. Met some good people. Nick Nurse, who's the coach of the Toronto Raptors, Chris Finn's the coach of that British team. They were pretty good characters. So pretty well everything happened, and it's only in the last couple of years that they've probably gone back a bit, because they're struggling to get high performance money. The women's team missed out on next year's Olympics by a couple of points to South Korea. But pretty well everything that you'd want to build up, improved facilities. Those 4 quadrants, the only one missing really is the one with the National League. The teams still control that. But Basketball New Zealand's done quite a good job under your umbrella now. You've got all the quadrants sorted. And the trust money, gambling money. And that gets back to something else that I think you have to have if you're in charge. You have to do things with the end in sight, some sort of vision. So if you've got a basketball team, whether it's a school young team or an old team or whatever team, you've got to see where you're going. And that usually means more than one season if you're coaching youngsters. Usually build, well, if you're working with the Huskies here in Auckland now, first Auckland team for a while, isn't it? And the Bulls, I would think they're both using this year as a foundation block, a stepping stone to 2 or 3 years' time. They wouldn't be looking at winning the National League next year, would they? What about all of you? You all active coaches? Have I missed anything out, Leonard, on that?
Just your, so you spoke about, upon reflection, the principles that you used as a coach actually is pretty much the same leadership principles that you used in your role as CEO of an organization. Did you know that when you were actually going through it, or is that just something that you...
It was like, get there, find out what the lay of the land was, which was unbelievable, and then just day by day. But I always knew where I wanted to, where we had to aim for. And that came from being involved with Basketball New Zealand here, as a coach and on the board and that sort of thing. And I think that's something about the New Zealand environment, and I would be surprised if any of you that coach don't find this. You can't, you can't be like Dan, and even he, working for the Breakers. He's a professional coach, but he probably has to do more than coach. He probably has to do public relations and a lot of other things. But what he doesn't have to do, that most coaches have to do, even if you're just coaching high school teams, is you have to do a lot of organisation, don't you? You end up getting involved in who's driving who to the game, and who's taking who home, and who's raising the money to buy new uniforms, and a lot of little things like that.
Who's dealing with the parents?
And so you do learn all those things, Leonard, and they do help you in your working life. But you never stop learning.
Any other questions?
During your time as CEO of Auckland Basketball, what sort of resources and things did you do to help grow women's involvement in basketball? So like from a younger age, was it just just a few weeks or so, like going to a few trials? I noticed that there's like no younger girls that would attend the trials who just boys. So what?
Are you talking about New Zealand?
Yeah. So what would you suggest helping?
Coming from New Zealand, I noticed a huge difference. In New Zealand, I actually saw girls, women treated equally to men, and quite large participation in every association. Maybe not right down to a young level. I think that's where netball had the advantage, and in England, very much so. If you were coaching, if you had a club in England, males would be your priority. And in fact, in some cases, clubs actually had to specialise just in women's teams in order. I met Kim Lucas downstairs. She was New Zealand manager for 15, 20 years, and she mentioned when she went with the tour firms to Wales. And I said, yeah, you would have played one team. You wouldn't have played the Welsh team. You would have played one club team, because that was a team that only had women. And to some extent the same was with throughout England. But it has changed in the last 15 years. It really has. The clubs are a lot more inclusive, but they don't really tend to start young enough with girls. And that's where netball certainly is the number one sport in England. And it's certainly the number one sport in Wales too. They think dodgeball's an international sport and basketball's not in Wales. So it's my latest challenge, my current challenge. I have to tell them, look, dodgeball's a film. Seriously, I'm not, you think I'm joking, don't you?
No, that's what we're laughing.
Yes, another question.
My question is, you would have had a big job with Basketball England, and it would have had many stakeholders, especially when you first started there and you're changing culture and trying to get people on board. What were your strategies with trying to manage all those different stakeholders and get them on board with your vision? Not just your staff, obviously, within Basketball England, but the BBL and your national teams and your funders and things like that.
We could be here quite a while for me to answer that question, because it was quite complicated. I remember going to meet the BBL board, and a guy who I became very good friends with me, and he actually checked up a big sponsor for the BBL that they turned down during the meeting, said, "And do you want to coach?" And I said, no, I just want to see basketball grow here. And then they said, well, it's just about lunchtime, thank you very much, you can go now. And that sort of showed you the mentality of the people you were dealing with. They saw you as an outsider. They have never really changed, I hate to say. It's run by an inner sanctum of about 5 teams to this day, so in 20 years they haven't even got a naming rights sponsor. Here, at least in New Zealand, you've got Sal's Pizza. So the BBL, and now of course we have the British Basketball Federation, and we have the same issues trying to deal with the BBL. And I think, how long has the NBL been part of Basketball New Zealand? Not very long. Yeah.
Just come back.
Not too.
I think that is probably the model you want to follow. Unless, like Australia, you have a very big commercial person, developer driving and having you, Larry
Kessel.
Yeah. Unless you get that, and like in New Zealand, if you got a sponsor worth squillions, you might go for that. We actually got a sponsor over there. I would have handled that differently if I could go back now. We all make mistakes. Don't worry, it wasn't plain sailing. As far as the other stakeholders go, referees, coaching association, players association, the national teams, national coaches, getting all that going was relatively easy. They were hanging out for more, And then Sport England came on board with quite a lot of money.
That helps.
But just like here, we might have got 2 million quid. Hockey would have got 10 million. Netball would have got 20 million or whatever, they were telephone numbers. So it's very much that institutional bias, I think was the word I read in the New Zealand media recently.
Absolutely.
But the other thing we had over there was you had the club structure, but you also had a communication device through to the clubs through 10 regions. And we were able, what I was able to do was bring in inter-regional tournaments as part of the performance structure. Every year something added. We picked up some good people from Australia to come and work for us, one of whom you know, Warwick Can. Picked up another guy that Mick said he knew, Ben Rush.
Oh, yes.
Ben did a great job. He landed a deal whereby we got all this money that rugby and football, cricket were getting, called an advanced scholarship, advanced something, education and sporting excellence. It's got a different name now. And that enabled all these basketball academies to be set up in colleges. So there's always something you can do to improve your structure. And I think that's the other thing, it's the same if we get back to leadership and coaching, is it's always that question you ask after a loss or a win, what can we do better? Or the end of a season, what can we do better? And that might be a good note to finish.
It is. Didn't have a question. We're good. You can just put your hands together. Up here in New Zealand.
Have I got something to read?
Got something to read there. A couple more books.